There's this idea of my main character going into Mexico and having a first glimpse at the Juarez, the chaos of Juarez. And that I felt had a strong cinematic potential.
We visited Juarez, which is a very scary place right now. You could tell that it was a city that had suffered an enormous amount of damage due to the cartels. I remember asking the federales when we went down there, what's the good part of town and what's the bad part of town? And he says, the good part of town is where they're not killing anyone.
It's not possible to shoot in Juarez because it was too much violence, but it was very, very, very important for Patrice, Roger, and I to shoot in Mexico. Because I wanted to embrace that culture, I wanted to be close to feel the reality of this culture.
Mexico City is such a huge city that on its outskirts, it's very similar to what we can find in Juarez.
There's a fair amount of use of different kind of colors in the film that were inspired by what we can see when we arrive in Mexico. The use of those bright colors and this contrast of this joy coming from the color and the violence in the country was so striking.
The US side is very beige, it's very corporate look. When you go to Mexico, it's a bit more of a free-for-all, anarchy, chaos. And when there's something that we try to exploit in the movie, in the design.
You hear that? Those aren't firecrackers.
There's a vicious drive into Juarez. One of the very first questions that we had beginning to storyboards was what the pacing and what the feeling was going to be.
Spotter vehicle, left lane, left lane. Spotter vehicle, 9 o'clock.
Roger is so strong as a visual storyteller, so that when we're working on the framing of shots, the ways that the camera will move, we would discuss the pace from frenetic action through Juarez, through driving trucks, through seeing buildings whip past, and so catching pieces of it, an awareness of how the camera is also a character, and staying with Kate, and that really brings you into the action through a character's perspective. And then we would get to this, you know, to being stuck. When you're stuck, you can't really move around.
Get your service weapon out.
There's an incredible sequence as they're coming back over across the border. It all happens in about 90 seconds on screen. Months and months of planning and building and design.
It was impossible to shoot on the Bridge of the Americas, where the action will take place, for obvious security reasons. Since 9/11, it's not possible anymore to shoot on those bridges.
Roger Deakins and Patrice and Denis and everyone putting our heads together and figuring out how to shoot this in sort of an epic, intense way, which is the way it's written.
It's a pivot in a story, in Kate's journey, how her character is being transformed by what's happening. That's the main set that needed to be, you know, it was specific. It needed to be that and nothing else. The real place is on the US side. There's 14 booths, and there's a lot of traffic. The traffic doesn't move. We realized that, you know, economically we could never build that.
Patrice sent me a drawing of how he envisioned the border crossing. I think he really distilled what was necessary for the shot, but create that claustrophobic and trapped feeling.
That is the first beat before going back to United States, is that toll booth. The fact that there's border agents rushing into the scene, so those booths are the excuse for those agents to rush into the scene. And it's also the excuse for the traffic to slow down.
We built a replica of the border crossing in El Paso, complete with the Bridge of Americas, going over that looks as if you're there.
We laid tarmac and then discerning what would be visual effects and what would be real, and creating the toll booths, and then our amazing painters with striping and aging and oil stains. And I mean, it's just, it takes so many levels to make it look real. But then achieving it was a whole other issue.
The hardest scene in the whole film was the shootout at the border post when they're coming back from Mexico.
I'm deeply inspired and excited to work with Roger. The only way to work with such a master is to try to flirt with disaster. And I want Roger to be deeply inspired.
He's shooting that way and this way, you know, all this different action. So that was something we storyboarded in quite considerable detail. And so much of it was played from Emily's point of view, and she's sitting in the back of a car. It's really important you build up at the beginning, like who's the bad guy and who's not. And, you know, there's all the civilians in between, you know, the two parties.
And the bridge to camera was fairly static for quite a bit of that. It comes down to being locked in a place where you are unable to move. And staying with Kate, you're only able to see what you can.
Get out of the car.
So it's like that confusion. And then when, you know, the confrontation and the guys in they get shot, you're in, the camera can justifiably come in to see it more clearly and see the horror of what's happening.
The action that is in here is so intense and so real for the characters in the moment that I think it's gonna knock the audience back because it's so real, it's frightening.